Welcome everyone. My name is Valerie Verhack. I am a curator at M Leuven in Belgium, and I'm also a curator of the show House of Cards by Demand, which also includes contributions by Arno Brandelhuber, Martin Boyce, Rickrit Tirvania and Caruso St. John. I'm very happy to hosting you this evening on this online opening of the show. And I'm sitting here in one of the central rooms of the exhibition in which we show Model Studies 4, which is a whole new body of work that is on show for the very first time. Later on, I will be talking with Thomas Demand, and you will also be able to ask your question to Thomas. You can post your questions in the comments of this Facebook post below. And then afterwards, my colleagues will select some questions, hand them over to me, and I will be able to ask them to Thomas after the talk. But before we start the talk, I'm very pleased to present you a short film which introduces the exhibition, in which Thomas Demand comments upon all the works that are included in the show House of Cards. It was a film that was shot by M Leuven and recorded a couple of weeks ago in Berlin during the preparations of the show. The film takes about 7 minutes, so I'm really looking forward to seeing you back after the film.
House of Cards is, of course, a pun on the TV series. But House of Cards is also the idea that you build a house of paper and you have a look how far you can push it. I started making sculptures which I don't have to store. That departure led me to document my sculptures. However, the sculptures all have a narrative, a really strong narrative. First of all, the spaces, the rooms, the interiors, and many of them have some kind of significance which is out of the picture, which is the context in which we learned about that space. So I made these sculptures, like in the beginning it was a very simple daily object, and it was 2 objects. Suddenly you have a narrative. Narrative becomes dominant, so you have to control the narrative of these objects to each other. Imagine you have a desk, there's a pen, there's an ashtray, and let's say there's a torch. So why is a torch on a desk? And suddenly as a viewer you make a story out of that. The show at M is a very different take on my work. It's basically combining my relation to architecture. And I think over the years we became quite interesting in terms of collaborative, of like how a show could look like exhibition architecture. And we trying to combine like an idea of like taking space, going out in the reality with something which is actually not really fit for that, which is the paper model. Models are kind of really a completely underexposed cultural technique which we use every day. Science in general is based on a model. If you think of toys, children's toys, you have these little dogs. Maybe even before the baby sees a real dog, it's playing with a little puffy animal, which is a dog. The model studies in general is the idea to go to some kind of abstraction. It's a way of looking at model making from a distance. The model making, what is the model? What is the practicability of a model itself? And what is the physical surface of a model once it's not like to be shown in a museum? With model studies, I started to look at the models of other people instead of my own models. And I started with John Lautner's models. He's famous for not being a great draftsman, but a very good architect, which makes buildings which are mostly unpredictable in a sense. He tended to, like me, to throw everything away once a project is gone. And so 13 models remain, and these 13 models are all depicting projects which haven't been realized. And I photographed those from a very close-up in a sense that it becomes an abstract image. I did do a similar second iteration of the series with Model Studies 2. I worked with Sana on the Architectural Biennale, and they invited me to come to their office. And I saw an empire of paper, which was really fantastic because they never throw anything away. At least I thought they do. They have these paper objects which they make out of office paper because it's the cheapest and the fastest. And all these kind of copy paper sculptures become, or models become eventually architecture, or they won't become architecture, but they're always a communicative tool. And they pile them up. So when you walk through their office, there's towers and towers of projects, which is really beautiful. And I started photographing those. The fourth one is shapes of dresses by Azedine Alaya, which I knew before he passed away. Alaya is also famous for doing them himself in the first dress. And then some confectioner comes and makes it in different sizes, as we know him. But like the first dress is done by himself, which is a very unusual practice. They're very beautiful biographical objects. They have a patina, they have the traces of use, a little writing here, a little measure there. And I thought those shapes are really beautiful and very reminiscent of my own shapes. The Nagelhaus has been a commission which we were asked to contribute to in Zurich. The whole idea was that we built a Chinese restaurant which kind of just closed in China because it had to make way for like a development. And the owner of that restaurant refused to go. For 3 years he could do it, then his health deteriorated and he had to close anyways. But that building became famous. It was in a very interesting process with the architects to go back and forth. So I build a model, I send it to them, they make a plan, I get it back, I build a bigger model. And we were like trying to a rather unconventional way of developing a building, and the idea that the building always had to be looking like a model once it's in a large scale. So I didn't want to have a Madame Tussauds building. I wanted to have a building with kind of where you really don't know, is this real or is it not? We ran into political quarrels after passing all the institutional juries and everything, and it didn't happen in the end, which is fine with me. I didn't want to go into any political campaigning. The architects tried to do that, but the building itself had some consequences because nothing is there still. But the term we coined, which is Nagelhaus, which means the house of the nail, is still around in Switzerland. And we made this word because in China there is a saying, if you withstand the pressure of society, you will be hit like a nail sticking out of the wood. And so that's where we came from. There's also a third project, which is a collaboration with architects, same architects, Caruso and John, as the Nagelhaus, and that's a pavilion which I was invited to build in Denmark. The client wanted to have a place where you can get together and sit, discuss, come up with new plans, not be in a corporate environment, because like the company itself sits next to a warehouse. And they wanted to have like something when you make all the way to get to the company from, I don't know, London, America or something, to have something to remember. That's my first real build commission. It's under construction right now. And that is based on the idea of translating the logic of paper. How do you make paper constructions into real life? The use of models is everywhere. And what a model does, it reduces the complexity of reality to some key elements which are important for the model. For me, they are a beautiful way of rebuilding our impression of the world. In other words, the memory. And the models I'm building of things, they are kind of depicting what we remember instead of what it really was. And that's basically the core of my work.
Welcome back, everyone. For those joining us now, my name is Valerie Verhack. I am a curator at M Leuven. I also curated the show House of Cards that we are officially opening online this evening. House of Cards, the exhibition of Thomas Demand, who I'm here welcoming this evening. Good evening, Thomas.
Hello.
So I will be talking to Thomas now, but you will also be able to ask your questions by posting your questions in the comments below this Facebook post. So good evening, Thomas. We've been working on this project, House of Cards, for the last 1.5 years, I think. And actually, from the start, it was quite obvious that we did not want to take over an existing retrospective exhibition, but we really wanted to develop a unique project of our own for M Leuven. And in the beginning, I expressed my interest in the model series studies. in the model studies series, sorry, which, as you just explained in the film, are all about the model by other architects, other designers, and from there originated the idea of focusing in this exhibition on the relationship of your work with architecture. So my first question to you would be, to what extent do you consider architecture to be an important topic in your practice?
Well, I didn't, in the beginning, everything was everything. So everything was part of something else. And over the years of doing my work, I realized that there's a very different perspective onto my work from the architectural side than it is from, the photo theory and contemporary art side. And I could see that as a ongoing process. So it was in that perspective, it was never very important whether photography lies, because all the architects know that photography lies, and they use it very often for exactly that purpose, to present something which is not there yet as a real thing. And I found this very curious, and in the end, I have been friendly with a lot of architects, and I have been showing in the Architectural Biennale as well as in the Art Biennale. And I'm an amateur in architecture, of course, but I think it resonates. My work resonates there in a very different way than it does in the arts, as I said. And so over the years, I realized that there's a lot of work which actually deals with architecture as such. And the model studies were a result of that, but it wasn't the only one. And to show here, I thought it would be quite interesting to do something which retells the last 20 years, basically, with a combination of works which nobody has seen together like this before.
Mm-hmm. I'm sitting here in the room, in one of the central rooms of the exhibition, with Model Studies 4, a whole new body of work. But I would like to go back to the beginning of the show, where we've installed a kind of introductory image, which is Model, an image, a picture of 2000. But if I recall this well, Thomas, I think in the beginning you were thinking about another picture as an introductory image of the show, which was Drafting Room, which shows an interior of an architecture studio, a drawing room of an architecture studio. So why did you finally choose Model as an introductory image?
Because I thought like it would be more interesting to kind of have the theme of the model in the center rather than the practice of the architect, because I cannot tell you much about the idea of the architect as a practitioning office or something like that. The drafting room, which I originally planned, is that what my interest in that space was basically I wanted to build a place which is not a studio, but has the same sense of beginning when you come in the morning and the empty studio, and you just can somehow either it kind of works and you come up with something great, what you think is great at the time, or it doesn't work, but it's this kind of empty, fresh table idea. But it wasn't really about the architect as such. It was just the architect was a stand-in for the artist. With the model, however, with the one which we choose in the end, it is much more about the idea, the notion of the model. And if you think about models in a very briefly, then you think of probably about architects' models. You might think of children's models like train station, puppet houses or something like that. And then maybe you get to a DNA model or something like that. But it doesn't, on the surface, that architectural model is already a very quick association to what a model can be. And if you look at in the world, then you have a lot of architecture, and many of these buildings have been a model at some point. Now, how come that there are so many banal and not so good architecture in all the cities we live in? Because obviously the models weren't representing that architecture properly, because otherwise nobody would have built them. Mm-hmm. And I thought if I can get into that discussion, but I also can go back to like the photograph relationship between the model and the client. And for me, that was 1933 or 34, a photograph of Hitler in Speer looking at the projected model of the German pavilion in Paris at the World Exhibition, which was opposing the Soviet monument, which was by then completely under construction already. So if you look at an architectural model, what happens is you go on your knees, you go lower, and you look from where you think like a pedestrian would look at a brand new big building. Of course, fascist architecture is about so superimposing and being very overburdening, also very simplified. So basically what you forget if you look in that way onto architecture is that your eye is already as large as a double-decker bus. So you can, you came from through the room where the model stands, and you're already God because you're so much bigger and you're just the one who pays for the building. So the attitude you bring towards a model like this, like an architectural model, has so much to do with power that I thought that would be quite interesting as a photograph. And then the next room we have is like one of the early collaborations I did with an architect in terms of exhibition architecture with Arno Brandlhuber is the Embassy series, where I made 10 photographs in an apartment which nobody had ever access to before. And so that is again power, but in a totally different form.
Okay, we'll come back to Embassy later on in the conversation. But you mentioned already the contribution of Arno Brandlhuber, and so I think already from the beginning we kind of knew that we were not going to make a purely picture show, I think. If I recall well, I proposed at some point that we could maybe install an installation by Riquet Vanilla, which actually has your name in its title, which is called Untitled 2013, Thomas Demans here. Upon, if I recall well, you spontaneously replied, but then we should also show work of Martin Boyce. And then we also integrated a collaboration with Caruso St. John with the Nagelhaus. So the show contains all these contributions. And so I would like to ask you, to what extent do you consider House of Cards being a solo show?
Well, I think it's to use a very, very popular word, I think it's a hybrid. It's not a group show and it's not a solo show. And architecture in general, and I'm just a bloody amateur in the field, but like it is always about teamwork. So nobody does anything alone in architecture. And and over the all the projects in the thing somehow have been the result of like working with someone else. Like even the model studies, the ones you look at now, of course, I'm looking at someone else's work, which is the models for dresses by Azedine Alaya or the models of Sana. And so it is always like a teamwork in terms of architecture, and that reflects that is reflected in the show, I think. Yes. But it's kind of a curious thing because it's kind of like my work is the backbone and it's probably the reason for the show, but it's not the only reality in the show, which is very important for me, and I think that makes it, for quite interesting as a typology.
You mentioned already, so the model studies here indeed are the model studies. I am sitting in this room of the model studies, which are based on the designs and the models by Azedine Alaya. We are showing several of the series of the model studies, but what I would like to ask is, how do you choose the subjects of these model studies?
That is hard to tell. If I would know how things come to me, I would go for them. But I just somehow it's intersections in life which are interesting. The Geary, the Lautner things came along because I was at the Getty as a scholar, and I was looking into their collection, and then I saw these models which can never be shown because they're so fragile. So and they were all about unbuilt projects, which are of course like very interesting for me because I don't need to make a picture of something which is existing already. And so I thought that would be quite interesting, and then that led me to a rather abstract approach to them. So I think you can feel Lautner's thinking in the photographs, but you cannot recognize Lautner in the end. And that's probably the same with all the others. You can probably imagine the feeling being in the office, surrounded by lots of designs and lots of materials, which could become something or will never become something, anything, in the Sana world. Or you can, these are the things you're looking at in behind the sofa are, these are the patterns the Atelier Alaya is using to make dresses from the archive of Azedin Alaya. And they, by time, of course, they change, they put them back on the rack. For them, these patterns are not artworks. For them, the patterns are tools, like like a scissor for me or something. And so they have their own beauty, which is completely unintended. And of course, it reminded me immediately of the leftovers of Matisse, a picture I made about the studio of Henri Matisse, where he has all the paper cutouts on the floor. And they look a little bit like that, only that these things become a jacket, or a shirt, or a skirt or something. So, yeah.
Okay. You mentioned the encounter with Azedin Alaya also in
I need to finish. Yeah? I just really answer your question. Sorry. So this came along to me. The Getty came along to me because I was there. Then the Sana came because I just was, I was curious, and I'm always curious about models. I find models such an exposed cultural technique, which and I thought it would be quite interesting to do it. And then I was looking for models of architects I love, and one of them is Hans Hollein. And I just, I had the chance to see the archive before it was kind of taken into pieces after his death, which was just mind-blowingly beautiful to see all these ideas sitting in boxes, which kind of, they still have a lot of energy, and they still kind of are very interesting and appealing. But they're part of the history already. And so this is in a way how they came to me, but it's a very photographic approach in this kind of sense. And usually my work is actually not very photographic in nature, I think.
And are these model studies in any way staged, or are the pictures reflecting the compositions how you found them?
Yeah, they do reflect it, but of course everything is staged in photography, because if I would move the camera like 10 centimeters to the left, it would be already a different picture. So in the sense it's staged. And the question is, do you stage the camera or do you stage the object? In previous photographs, I staged the object. And here I staged the camera until I found the right picture I was looking for. So I would consider them as my abstract, my effort in abstract photography, which by definition of photography is of course nonsense.
Okay. In the next room in the exhibition, we show a model of a pavilion that you also just mentioned in the film, which was a commission by textile company Quadrat. And so to develop the design of these buildings into actual buildings, you took on a collaboration with British architecture office Caruso St. John. And so as we speak, these buildings are being built and they will be there to stay. To what extent do you think that these will change the perception of your practice?
I have no clue. I have really no clue. But the Quadrat Pavilion is incredibly exciting for me because I can do something which is going to be in a remote part of Denmark, and I don't think many people will go there in the end. I hope it will be millions, but I guess realistically it will be hundreds. And they might not even come because of my building there. They kind of come because they want to do holiday there, and then they see this thing standing around, and maybe they get curious. But it's the whole building. It's actually 3 buildings. They follow the logic of paper. That's important to me. So my design rule was somehow that I kind of make something like a folly, like a pavilion, which is kind of more like a tea pavilion in the 18th century, or the Randy's Donuts in LA, or something like a building which doesn't really follow the normal rules of architecture and its efficiency and tradition. And I design everything. I designed these chairs, I designed door handles, I designed the lamps. I would have designed, everything else as well, but they at some point, I think they stopped me because it got too much out of hand. But it was actually it's a very full on approach from a complete amateur onto a building, and this is just fantastic that somebody trusts me enough to let me do that. And the building has not presented anywhere before, so this is also the first time we go public with this.
Yes.
It's supposed to be ready, was supposed to be ready this fall, but like, of course, with COVID and everything, it got delayed until next spring. But it is already, the glasses, it's glazed already, so they are already objects and like closed spaces. And no, I'm very happy that I could do that.
Yes.
And
Also in the
most of the inspirational research in the show,
Yeah.
in the shows between here as well.
Yes, exactly. Then you already mentioned earlier the collaboration with Arno Brandelhuber for Embassy, which is an installation that we're showing here also in the show, as well as another installation which is called Nagelhaus, which was the collaboration with Caruso St. John. And both installations can be read as a comment on society today. So what I would like to ask you, according to you and in perspective of these two installations, what would you describe as a role of foreign artists in society today?
Oh, it's a very difficult one, because I think the artists have a responsibility, but I think art is also has its own responsibility, and it's different from the artist's responsibility. We have to make work which is meaningful. Very often it might mean to us ourselves something else that it means to the rest of the world. But the artwork has to be there on its own right. It doesn't have to be there as a transparent in a demonstration or something like that. And it needs to be a communicative tool. So it needs to be people will have to be able to understand, see something, whatever they think is kind of important about that. And it should be somehow not so far away from what the artist intended, hopefully. But we never know. So the artwork has its own independent state of being once it's out there. With the embassy, it was architects architects and artists are doing very different things. I don't have a theory for that. I wouldn't say that architects are not artists, but I think a lot of architects would say that they're not artists, and they have clients and they have a problem to solve, or like they have a problem to create, and they have their ways of solving those. An artist is in his approach and in his speed probably also, and in his efficiency is a very different creature, I think. Nevertheless, of course, you can collaborate on things. And with Caruso and John, over the years, we established a quite reliable and quite exciting and inspiring platform for working together on different things. And now working on the Quadrat pavilions in Denmark is like, again, another way of working together. With Arno Brandelhuber, it was about a suite of works, of 10 works, which I had made by rebuilding an apartment which is actually in Rome, after my memories of being there for like 25 minutes before being thrown out. And I thought it would be, and I rebuilt everything I could remember, and I needed an architectural exhibition architecture which would recreate the apartment, but not as a model, but as a perspective. It's enabling the viewer the perspective approach towards the pictures I made of that architect. It sounds very difficult and complex, but it is actually very simple when you see it, and that's the beauty of the design. I had other projects with Brandelhuber. He's a fantastic, quite radical architect in Berlin, and we worked on things since like 15 years. And he always has a very, like in German there's the word rabiat, like it's not brutal, but it's kind of very hands-on approach on solutions. That is very enjoyable. Caruso and John are very totally different in terms of character and approach. I wouldn't like to compare the two, but of course I have done more projects with them in the past than with Brandelhuber. The role in society for an artist, I think, is kind of I can see things. I can make pictures of things, and therefore these things get into reality. Somehow, as a photographer, especially, but like also as a painter, as a sculptor, you can bring out the metaphorical context, content of something, and put it out for discussion, and hopefully bring it to a level where people can actually think and talk about it without being forced to give an answer. But it's very hard to kind of, I think the responsibility of artists is also very often overestimated, because we don't have any political power. I think we shouldn't have any either. We don't have any. I don't think anything changes through art in the world, but the minds will change, and the minds can expand, and we can show possibilities of thinking about the world, which a politician probably can't.
Okay. As a last question, I would also like to mention the fantastic book that we created for the show, which is here for the opening of the show, which is entitled House of Card, of course, a collaboration that we did with Mac. You made already some publications in the past, so I would like to ask you, to what extent is this book to you complementary to the other publications you already made?
Well, I think books are really, books, this is a commonplace, books are a medium, but like very often you know about a show only through books. And I think, I always found it's a huge privilege to be able to make a book for a show, and it's not necessarily the case in the future. I don't think every show will still have a book. And so if I have the chance and the means, and somebody asks me to, and the invitation and so forth, then I really want to make it a very unique experience which accompanies the show and reflects somehow the show and the intentions of the show in another way of just showing what's in the show, like basically literally. And so here we have it's a thick book. We have way more material in there than you can probably kind of grasp in the show. There's also unpublished material in there which I didn't use in the first place about the model studies, and I think it might have to replace, in COVID times now, it might have to replace the presence of the show to a certain extent as well. And I think it does that. It's a very finely designed book by Julie Peters, which is has a very different character from my other books. I think it's very much more about like browsing through the pages than opening the book and looking at a single page. So it's the relation between the projects which kind of gets emphasized in this. And it binds together things which are in the show. I think it's exciting in the show that we have spaces with a complete different atmosphere, like they're all different. And people will be surprised what they see in the show. But of course, it's very, one of them is an architectural proposal. The other one is a lost commission. The third one is a photograph of other people's models. So it is kind of diverse in a sense, and it's kind of the book beautifully puts it all together into one flow, which is not easy.
Yeah.
And so I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy about the book. It will have its own life, and has a very unique presence, I think.
Okay. Well, thank you, Thomas. Those were all of my questions. I can imagine that the audience has also some questions for you. So I would like to ask you those questions as well. They will come up in a moment.
I think there's a lot of the line between exhibition architecture and architecture is very fluent. It's kind, some of the things we have in the show are wallpapers. Some of it is sculpture, which is kind of coming across like an architectural feature, which is Martin Boyce's beautiful work.
Yes.
It's some of it is very classic show, like pictures on the wall, like you have on the background. But most of it has a twist and is using the format of the exhibition itself to a big extent. And that's what I find very exciting and what I'm very happy about, that we were able to put all these things together and find a flow which makes it intelligible.
Yeah. Okay, so one question is, what does this show mean to you personally and your career, Thomas?
Well, I think it's I don't have to prove myself as an artist every time. After a couple of years, I did a number of shows which I think kind of show what my intentions, what my main intentions are, and the older you get, the more retrospective things will get, because you have so much work which you can choose from, hopefully. And in this case, this is kind of it's a curated show, but the curation is not like what's the best of mine. It's more like the angle on it is coming from a content. It's like you put glasses on which only show you architecturally relevant works, and this is quite interesting, I think, for me, and it opens a lot of possibilities for me as well. That's why for me, I'm really happy about doing it.
Another.
So when I say that kind of quickly, because at my first site visit to the museum, it's also, the museum has an old building and a new building, and what we are using is the first floor in its entirety, I would say, or most of it, and that kind of spans from the old building to the new building. And in the new building, we have spaces which are 8 meters high, which can, if you make small photographs, might be overwhelming, but like we could use them so beautifully, like they made for that work to be sitting in there, because like it's exactly the same size of 8.30 m, and it fits in there. And there's a room with a fantastic relation to the city, and on the second floor, but by then you're already in reality, you're on the 5th floor or something, and you look down on the city, and from Rickrit's bar you see the city as it works, but from an elevated perspective. You don't find that very often in a museum. And by putting the entrance of the show in the old part of the building, in the older building, you come basically with your expectations of what Thomas Demant's work is. You get embraced or like welcomed by a work which is kind of part of my canon, I would say. And then we take it from there. And, literally and physically, you come from the stuff, or like from the, let's say, classic stuff to the more, open in the field stuff I work. And I think that is, you hardly ever have the possibility to kind of adapt it so well to architecture than I had here.
Okay. Another question that kind of fits through what you're saying, do you want to realize more architectural projects that are there to stay in the future?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would, but I'm really not an architect. I know about the complexity of architecture, and I know about the difficulty. I have built, buildings in my life, and I think it could be a nice side note to a profession which is otherwise very hard and very stressful and is kind of in the middle of society, because in terms of investment and necessity and infrastructure, in a way that artists never is. And I think, I can play I can play a nice tune on a piano, but I'm not a pianist. Let's put it that way.
And then maybe a last question, will there be more model studies? How do you see this evolving in the future?
I have no clue. I didn't have a clue when I started with them. I just thought like, like I made models, I photographed them, I take the models out of the world, I used the photographs, and they had a certain way why they were like that, the practical reasons, but also contextual reasons. And when I started, and then I thought at some point, how about like looking at other people's models instead of not photographing my own models, or like you look for possibilities within the work, and I thought that could be quite interesting to expand on a field where actually not much is being done. Like artists, there is no artistic work in photographing architectural models, really, which I know of, and I found this kind of peculiar. because the photography plays such a big role. If you think of, Beatrice Colomina wrote a whole book about the influence of photography onto the design and the understanding of the modern architecture, the idea of the modern architecture, which is fantastic and central to it. So I thought like that would be quite interesting if it's a little bit of a detour to take. And so I'm still taking these detours. I don't know when I take the next one, and I'm not, I have no plan really. It would be interesting to keep on going with that, but then you can kill an idea by talking about it too much.
There are more questions coming in, Thomas, so we'll just continue a bit more. Is your work political?
Well, it depends on what political. I'm an artist. and I make art to kind of say this in advance. So I might say something which is nonsense. However, I'm also a citizen and I can say things and I have opinions. Political, in my opinion, is the distribution of power. It's like how society organizes power and organizes how it's organizes the distribution of like who takes the responsibility for what and how do we structure our own living together. That's what politics is for me. And I don't think an artist has much of a say in that. That's an artist, I wouldn't say they sit alone in a studio, but like they deal with loneliness a lot, and they know they have to kind of deal with themselves before they deal with their art, or maybe by dealing with their art they deal with themselves or something. But it's only becoming a public profession when you made an artwork. When you know what you're doing, and when you can get out. And this is even the case with performing arts. So on the other hand, of course, by pointing out certain things, or like basically also capturing them, like there is art which was very political. If you think of Goya, or Hans Hake, or if you think John Hartfield, like there was always political art, and it was kind of taking a stance, but the stance very often doesn't mean too much to us anymore because we are not in these struggles anymore. But if it has to be also good art, and sometimes it's like you need a ladder to get on that level, and then once you're up there, you don't need the ladder anymore. So, but what is the ladder the artist needs to make good art might be his political opinion, and that might change. I don't think the purpose of art is necessarily a political one. I think it needs to have autonomy, and it's actually a lot of art is not about political issues, and might be actually why it's really lasting over centuries. I can still relate to a picture from the 17th century very well. And it shows me something about the human being and how it was and how it is to be a human being, and have empathy, for instance. But I might not understand to the full extent what the situation was in which the painting has been painted, which is a political situation in which it has been painted.
Okay, well, thank you, Thomas, so much for answering all of these questions, both mine and those are of the audience. And I also want to take this occasion to really thank you for all the trust, this great collaboration, all the inspiring talks we had all through this 1.5 years preparing of House of Cards. I also want to thank Mac for the great publication. And I also want to thank the team of M of making all of this possible. House of Cards will be on show until the 18th of April 2021. So if you have the chance to come, do come. You can find all information about how to book tickets and about the show on our website, or by clicking to the links that are posted below on this Facebook post. And of course, all visits to the museum will happen in the most safe and pleasant way. Next week, I will be talking to American artist Erica Beckman, because not only the show of Thomas is opening tonight, but also Fair Game, Erica Beckman's show, so which will be on view as from tomorrow. So check out our Facebook page, and then the only thing that rests for me to do is to wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you back real soon. And Thomas is still there from Berlin with the last comment.
I wanted to say thank you for all the people which helped with the show. Of course, the museum being so fearless, basically, because it is a very large endeavor, and it's kind of there's a lot of surprising things in there. But also my friends and colleagues which would help me to make this work, this show happen. And it's Martin Boyce, it's Rikrit Tiruvanija with a beautiful piece which hasn't been shown in Europe at all, and it's very interesting and mind-boggling. And then, of course, Anu Brandelhuber, Caruso and John, the Atelier Alaya, the Sana, the architectural company, which is fantastic, gets better and better every year, and the estate of John Lautner, of course. And I thank you wholeheartedly for helping me and letting me kind of sniff around in your archives, and it was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thank you and good night. Bye.
Bye-bye.